Hey guys, and welcome to part 2 of my review of the Hearthstone classic card changes. So we've just gone through all the class cards and we're going down to powerful neutral minions that Blizzard has decided need to be changed for the introduction of Standard and the Whispers of the Old Gods expansion. We can see here Knife Juggler's first on the list. Not really a surprise. Knife Juggler was basically the best standard 2-drop in the game. It resembled just your standard 3-2 for 2. You don't get your tag, you don't get your beast or mech or anything tag like that, but you get just the ability to put pings out, relevant pings, just ad nauseum. And when you combo that with the previous cards like Muster for Battle and Unleash the Hounds, which is still obviously it's a classic card, just creates so huge swings. So I think this nerf isn't really much of a nerf, to be honest. I think Knife Juggler, the power of Knife Juggler hasn't changed. Like, the power of Knife Juggler was always comboing it with something like Muster for Battle or Unleash the Hounds. Obviously, Muster for Battle is being cycled out, but you still have situations where you'll have cards on board that have a Death Rattle effect for, creation of tokens. So you can play those cards, and then in the next turn, play Knife Juggler, trade away, and get some pings. Or still combo with Unleash is still there. Combo with Paladin Hero Power and things like that create minions, still there. So, to be honest, this isn't really much of a nerf for Knife Juggler. Obviously, now it doesn't trade with 2/3s. It's not as good of an independent, just 2-drop. But I think a lot of the times, a lot of decks would not want to play their Knife Juggler on 2. They would rather drop a more robust, maybe a Death Rattle 2-drop, things like the old Mad Scientist, things like you've got your shielded mini bots, just more robust minions on 2, and then follow up with a Knife Juggler when you could get immediate value from it. So I think Knife Juggler will still see play. I think people might think twice before just auto putting them into every kind of deck they played that had any way to exploit it. But I think its most powerful incantation, its most powerful plays won't go away. So you'll still see it with those massive turn 5s for Hunter, and other situations as well as new cards get released that summon minions. So there you go. Knife Juggler, like a welcome nerf. I think it needed a nerf. It was just too good. Like, Blizzard released the Flame Juggler, and it just seemed so weak compared to a card that could keep generating value and continue to just put free damage on opponents' minions, and if needed, just get that extra damage to face that that can be so relevant at the end of the game. So then we move forward. We go to Leper Gnome. This change, I think, it will be underrated. I don't think people understand how significant this change is. Leper Gnome was an auto-include in aggressive decks. Even some hybrid decks would include Leper Gnomes as a 1-drop. You might, curve. A lot of decks would want to have stuff at that 1-drop curve, because we know how important in mid-range matchups making use of your turn 1 is. So Leper Gnome would just be that no-brainer 1-drop that if you couldn't get use out of any other particular ones, you just go with Leper Gnome. At this point, I think we're going to see the Stealth Worgen become the premier 1-drop, because the Leper Gnome guarantees you 2 damage, but if it can attack once, it's going to put 3. So very often, if you drop your Leper Gnome on turn 1, you'll get your 2 Death Rattle that you've locked in, and then an additional 1, and then 1 cumulative damage. But that cumulative damage will, if it's alive for 2 turns, instead of putting 6 guaranteed damage, it's only going to put 4. But so it's obviously that inability to put incremental repetitive damage on your opponent is hit really hard. But more importantly than that is it can't trade up to 3/2s. So it doesn't have as much reach. It doesn't have the same reach it did to trade with 2-drops. And because of that, I think the Leper Gnome is basically being gutted. I think it's gonna go back to its leper community and stay there, because it's not going to see much play outside of I think even the most desperate face decks will probably find a better 1-drop to just push damage through. So the Worgens, there's obviously class cards as well. I think people might just leave the 1-drop, like they'll leave the Leper Gnome and move just to saturate more 2 and 3 drops. We'll see how we go, but I think this is a pretty massive nerf for Leper Gnome. Which is good because it allows new 1-drops as well to see play. So there'll be new 1-drops that come through, maybe with Inspire effects or Battle Cries that we'll see play instead of the trusty Leper Gnome. Having said that though, we know that in Whispers of the Old Gods, there are quite a lot of Death Rattle kind of mechanics that you can resurrect Death Rattle cards, get Death Rattle effects to proc. So there is a chance that in specific Death Rattle decks, Leper Gnome will still be played just because of its powerful Death Rattle, but outside of that, I think it will see a big drop in popularity. We move to the Arcane Golem, and obviously it's pretty obvious. It gains 2 stat points, but it loses charge. So the Arcane Golem was obviously used in decks as finishes. We saw it used in it had a lot of popularity with Warlock that would use it in combination with Power Overwhelming and Faceless Manipulator. We saw it in like just face decks, face kind of hunter decks, and some zoo decks would run it. But unfortunately, and they would kind of run it in a situation where they didn't really mind giving their opponent a mana crystal. Sure, that mana crystal can be really detrimental, but often it was used as a finisher anyway. So it now just becoming a 4 for 3, give your opponent a mana crystal. Not good. Like there's almost no situation when you're going to want to, like, because you can get like a 3-4 for 3 or a 4-3 for 3. So you're only gaining basically 1 stat point for giving your opponent a whole mana crystal, which that reversal of tempo is just terrible. So the only time you could kind of justify playing it is when your opponent's already at full mana, but you don't really want to play a 4-4 for 3 at that late in the game. It just doesn't have that much of an impact that late in the game. So this is this has just become, I think it's gone to being a trash card. So it's gone from having a lot of use in the right decks and seeing play in kind of top tier decks to a card that just will see almost no play. So that they'll be dusted, I think, for most people. Blizzard's rationale is just that they were part of 1-turn kill combos, which they're trying to remove. So I can understand why they've done this. I just think perhaps that was a bit of an over nerf. Molten Giant. So here we see a change that was kind of a lot of players were kind of predicting to occur alongside something like a big game hunter nerf, because when you nerf kind of these counters to cards like Molten Giant becomes relatively more powerful. So they've kind of said that players have to risk a lot more to get that free giant, which is true. So we know that in the past you get a free giant at 10 HP. Now you'll get a free giant at 5. So you have to be pretty low to get them for free. But giants were good value when you used to be at like 13 life or 14 life and you get like a 4-drop giant. Now you have to be, we're talking 8 life, 9 life, and you start getting those 4 mana giants. It's nowhere near as as good as that. It's a pretty big nerf for the Molten Giant, because even players in the kind of premier decks you would see them, like let's say obviously Handlock, kind of other types of Warlock decks that can manipulate their life, things like the Echo Mage, those kind of really sturdy control decks that used Moltens would often kind of like, they would hover at around 10 to 15 life and get out there to, they're between 0 and 5 mana giants. Now when those giants are going to be 5 to 10 mana at that same threshold, it's just going to be a lot harder to get the value out of the Molten Giants. I think it is legitimately going to be extremely risky, and you're going to have a lot more like security to be able to play them. So at least Mage will have things like Ice Block to be able to kind of have that final word of, you can't kill me, so I'm okay with going down to 5 or 6 or 7 life. But for Warlock, I think it's going to hurt the prevalence of these in Warlock decks significantly, unless we can see kind of more heal mechanics come in for Warlock. Or I guess you could say that with the nerf of Silence, it kind of does make Molten Giants somewhat better. So when you do get that 8/8 torn up, the chance of it being silenced might be reduced because silence might just be not as prevalent in the metagame. So we'll see how this works. We'll see what, I think it's hard to say for now exactly what's going to happen with the Molten Giants, but that's a huge, huge nerf for them. Master of Disguise. So we see here that they feel that changing permanence, giving things permanent stealth was a design obstacle. So they're changing Master of Disguise to only grant it for your next turn. So this is a nerf that people look at and just kind of be like, what the hell? Like, I don't even know this card existed, Like, Master of Disguise is a card that hasn't seen play really in many decks. It's definitely got a strong effect, right? Like, giving something stealth has got a lot of power, a lot of kind of, you can use it as like a pseudo, how would you call it? Like pseudo immunity. Like if you've got a card that's traded to only have 1 life left that would be vulnerable to a ping, by playing a Master of Disguise and having it on 1 health, you've effectively kind of given it immunity for a turn so that then it can trade up. So it's obviously got utility and power, but what Blizzard are talking about is that perma stealth is something that just stopped Blizzard from putting in kind of cards that had like regular mechanics, like it could be buff mechanics or auras, often kind of triggered, or not triggered abilities, but end of turn abilities, such as Ragnaros's ability would pull cards out of stealth. But maybe things like just auras and kind of just maybe start of turn abilities as well that weren't triggering the removal from stealth. I'm not exactly sure whether you needed to be doing damage to trigger the removal. So things that could just stay perma stealthed would obviously have a lot of power. So this just kind of allows Blizzard to be able to feel like they can introduce things into the game with really powerful auras or really powerful kind of effects that you can have stealth for 1 turn. So they might be happy for you to stealth it for 1 turn, but perma stealth is obviously could be considered too strong. So maybe they've got some interesting ideas for rogue cards. We'll see what happens. Obviously, rogue are going to take a big kind of playstyle shift with the change to Blade Flurry. So I can see that this change is really good for rogue, actually. So people might look at this and see this as like a nerf. I don't think it's a nerf. I think it's a buff, because it's going to allow Blizzard to allow for much more powerful aura and ability-based minions that stealth will be able to interact with. So we might see rogues of the future benefiting a lot from their stealth and their ability to keep really powerful effects going. So that looks like that wraps it up, guys. So I'm not sure if Blizzard have other classic new card changes planned, but at the moment this is all they've announced. So some really exciting news. I think in some ways, just as a kind of synopsis, kind of last kind of conclusions, I think they've dropped the ball a little bit. I think predominantly, I think the big kind of ball drop was with Big Game Hunter. So going back to this card, I think this card could definitely have received a different type of nerf. I think it's just too good still. I think it needed a stat nerf to go along, even changing it to a 2/4. Because when Big Game Hunters played late in the game to remove a big minion, if it was 2/4, it kind of wouldn't be as threatening, because currently, as a 4/2, it can trade up really well. So it can trade up with, like other 5 and 6 cost minions. So it really was, and still is, will be providing a really powerful effect. So I think Blizzard could have done a bit more. But, it's better than nothing. So I guess we just have to wait and see what happens. But it looks like Blizzard are trying to push that control meta by, upcosting silence, upcosting these kind of powerful effects. So excited for Whispers of the Old Gods. We're only a couple of days away now, so stay tuned. I will be releasing my full video of my card review when the final cards are released. Thanks, guys. Jeremy, out.